He asked me to please speak about the 1 Minute Masmid. It happens to be the title of a book that I wrote. It's the first book I ever wrote. I have not published it, meaning to say it's not in the bookstores. It is on Amazon.com. I wrote it in 1994, so it goes back a little bit. And the truth is, I never intended to put it in the bookstores for a simple reason, that I felt it might be too intimidating and too controversial. And I hadn't married off any of my children yet. So I'm saying it with a smile and you're laughing, but I actually meant it seriously. And secondly, I really didn't feel that I was ready to speak about a subject which would be open to be misunderstood. And so I dafka only sold it to people who had heard about it or read it and asked me for a copy. This way I felt that people were screening themselves into looking at a sefer that talks about a subject that might create a lot of questions, even though I try to provide answers, and many people might not be ready for asking the question, let alone the answer. So it's a book about derech halimud, about learning, and I'm just going to give you a very brief history of why I came to actually even write the book, and then I'll describe a little bit more about the this is it here, the 1 Minute Masmid. I started learning in yeshiva at 17. I was extremely motivated. I had become from at 11 years old, but I was still in a non-Jewish school till I left at 16 years old. I finished what's called A-levels in a Jewish school. That's a certain name of matriculation, whatever you want to call it. And then I went on to yeshiva. When I went to yeshiva, I happened to have been very athletic, and so I had a fairly strong metabolism at the time, and I was extremely motivated to catch up the years that I hadn't learned. Even though I'd become from at 11, and I was davening 3 times a day by the time I was 17, I did not understand a word I was reading. Maybe I had a vocabulary of maybe 20 words that I could actually translate. So I had a lot of catching up to do. So in my mind I thought, it's not going to be difficult. The yeshiva knows what it's doing, so they'll catch me up. I was putting in approximately, and I really don't like saying this in public, so I'm saying it bli ayin hara, and I don't have those koiches anymore, but I used to sleep 2 hours every afternoon, and 1 hour in the evening, right before Ma'ariv, and then I was up all night, every day of the year. So I was putting in somewhere between 18 and 20 hours a day of learning, and what was really disturbing to me is that I really didn't feel any serious success. I was building my vocabulary, I was starting to make sense out of Chumash and Rashi, a little bit Mishnayos, but I was thrown into Gemara straight away. I had no questions in my mind about trusting that the system knew what it was doing. And I found that it was taking me not weeks, months, and not even years. It took years and years and years for the Gemara to make any sort of penetration whatsoever. I was in yeshiva a total of 12 years, and in my 7th year, I was starting to feel a very serious, not just frustration, but yiush. This doesn't make sense. I really am putting in a lot of time, and I'm trying to understand the Gemara. For some odd reason, really, I'm going to the shiurim, and it's just not penetrating. And I started to realize that I was lying to myself. I was fooling myself, because I was assuming that the system was going to perhaps take a diagnosis, if you want to call it that, of knowing where I'm holding and knowing what I've got to do to get to where I have to be. And I started realizing I was fooling myself, that there was no such system for ensuring that a person would cover Chumash, Nach, Mishnayos, and then go through Shas Bavli, Yushalmi, Tosefta, Sifra, Sifri, Mechilta, etc., I suddenly realized that the definition of the system I was in was, it had a very simple goal, to make sure that I come out knowing how to learn. But it wasn't necessarily included in that goal that I'm actually going to remember what I learned, or actually cover in a sequential way, from beginning to end, Chumash, Nach, Mishnah, Gemara, etc., Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Berurah. So in my 7th year out of 12, I started doubting whether what I was doing made any sense. I was engaged at yeshiva, and please, I have to say this right from the beginning. This is not about knocking the system. I'm not here to knock the system. I'm sharing a personal story. And in that personal story, as much as I try to quote Chazal, and a lot of Rishonim, and a lot of the greatest minds that lived in the past century. I'm referring to Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, I'm referring to Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, I'm referring to Rabbi Ruderman, I'm referring to the real giants of the past, you can say century actually, because we're in 2000 now. What they said about Derech HaLimud was shocking to me, completely mind-blowing. So this is my personal take on what I researched, and it's for you to decide whether any of it makes any sense to you. I say again, I've never been asked to speak about this subject. I never even offered. It never even occurred to me, to be quite frank, because I've really tried to just let this sefer, so to speak, find its right address, instead of putting it in people's faces. So now that I've actually been asked to speak about it, I say, you know what, that's completely minishmai. No, I didn't prepare for this, so okay, I'm going to talk about the 1 Minute Masmid. So to finish off the history, I made a calculation. I said, I really would love to finish Shas Bavli. But I suddenly realized, learning in Gateshead Yeshiva, and this is not a put down, I'm just sharing how the system works. There's an 8-year cycle for 8 Masechtas. Nezikin and also in Nashim. Usually we learnt about the first perek and the 6th perek. So I figured like this: if I stay in Shiva for 8 years, I will come out after 8 years knowing the 1st and 6th perek of 8 Masechtas. However, if I have no system of review, retention, to remember what I learnt the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th year, at the end of 8 years, I would probably remember maybe some of the Pilpul and Ian and some of the Sugyas, but without any serious Chazara, I would only know parts of the 1st and 6th perek of 8 Masechtas. So I said to myself, well, what would happen if I was the best Bach in Yeshiva, and in Bein HaSadarim, somehow or other, managed to be mashlim the rest of the Masechta each year? Okay, so let's say if I were the best Bach in Yeshiva, and I stayed for 8 years to finish the entire cycle, I would then be able to know 8 Masechtas after 8 years with no Chazara, and so I wouldn't remember them too well. So I said, well, okay, so I've got to figure out a way how after 8 years I will have had also another system within the 8 years to not just finish every Masechta, but also do a lot of Chazara. So by the time I finished, I'll really actually have a kinyan on 8 Masechtas. Do you follow the math so far? So then I made a calculation that for me to actually know Shas Bavli with Chazara would take approximately 3 Gilgulim. So I said to myself, you know, something's not really making sense. I understood that the goal was not to have me actually cover ground and remember what I've learned. The goal was, and perhaps in some cases may still be, to know how to learn. But this really got me thinking, and there's a chazal, you're probably familiar with it, it's in Marcus Daf Yud, B'derech she'adam roitze leilech, moilichin oisai. The direction a person, I'm going to mistranslate it, wants to go in. That's not what Ratzon means. Ratzon really means desperately wants to. Must is actually the correct translation. Rabbi Shlezner Shlita here in Monsey translates Ratzon from the Lashon Ratz, which means run. Ratzon means when you need something, that's still a higher level than regular Bechira, but when you must have, that's the highest level of all. The direction a person must go in, his rotzen is so strong, he has to have this. They accompany him. So asks the Marasha, why is it they accompany? Who's they? Who's they accompanying him? Answers the Marasha, it's all the malachim we create with every thought we have, everything we say, and everything we do. We create malachim. In America, you call them vibes. You create an energy. You create malachim. They are spiritual forces that will bring about, so to speak, in the universe, meeting the right people, being introduced to the right svarim or the right seminar, and Molichan, I say, they bring him in that direction, whether it's Latov or whether it's Lara. So it's interesting that happens to be, there is a gentleman who still lives in Gateshead. He's in his hundreds. When I met him, he was still in his 70s. His name is Mr. Book. I mentioned him in the Sefer. The Sefer is a story. I wrote in story form. I did not write this as a Musa Sefer on Derech HaLimud, because I felt that it would be too hard to digest. So I wrote it in story form. But every single character in the story is actually a real person. So Mr. Book, that's his real name, I call him Mr. Sefer in 1 Minute Masmid. So I hired him as my private Rebbe. Why did I hire him? I don't know how this happened. I was introduced to him. I was looking for a private Rebbe that would help me to cover ground with Chazara. So Mr. Book was introduced to me. He's a balabas. He used to work in credit cards. And he told me that he was very embarrassed to admit that he'd only finished Shas Be'iyun 9 times. So, 1 second. There are a lot of people who head yeshivas that haven't finished Shas that many times. Be'iyun, how is that possible? Why are you embarrassed? So he told me. He learned 17 years by Rabbi Gedalia Rabinowitz. Rabbi Gedalia Rabinowitz is not so well known in America. He was a Rosh Yeshiva in Sunderland, and he was a gadol from before the Chorban, before the war. He was a Talmud in Volozhin. So he taught my Rebbe the Derech HaLimud of Volozhin. I was blown away. Now, again, this is my story, and I'm going to try and substantiate my journey as I understood it through the people I met, and then the Sfarim that helped me understand. There is a way to cover ground and review. That's all it is. If you want to fall asleep, you can, because that's all it is. All it is sequential learning. Start at the beginning, go to the end, and then start again. That's all it is. There are a few little small secrets along the way, but those are the 2 big pieces. Start from the beginning of Chumash, go to the end, start again. Mishnah is the same thing. Nach, the same thing. Gemara is the same thing. But I'm going to talk about that in much more detail, because there's plenty of small print to add. So Mr. Book told me how his Rebbe, Rabbi Gedalia Rabinowitz, taught him for 17 years. He said the way they learned in Volozhin, just so everyone knows, Volozhin is the yeshiva that was started by Reb Chaim of Volozhin, based completely on the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon was probably incapable, if you can ever say that about the Vilna Gaon, but he was probably incapable of doing anything that was not 100% Chazal. It was probably just impossible. Maybe there would be conditions, sociological conditions that could tweak things, but he was following his Rebbe, the Vilna Gaon. In Volozhin, they learned sequentially from the beginning of Brachas till the end of Niddah. It was approximately a 7-year cycle. This is before the dream was Holland of Daf Yomi. Mr. Book told me that his Rebbe told him the lazy Bachrim in yeshiva generally finished every single Masechta 30 to 40 times. The Mitsuyanim 101 plus times. That was the norm. He told me that if any of them had to take a shtela position as a Rav, they would go to the Rosh Yeshiva and they would not be asked a single question anywhere in Shulchan Aruch. So what was the Feher? The Feher was only on sugyas throughout Shas. it was assumed that if they knew all of Shas, they could also figure out, based on Rishonim and Achronim, how to open up a Shulchan Aruch and learn the halacha, but they know how to learn the halacha from its makar in Shas Bavli. He also told me something also very interesting. Whenever they came to a pasuk in the Gemara, they stopped the learning and they immediately opened up the Tanakh and they learnt the entire kapitel, the entire chapter of that pasuk, so that they would always have the context, the full context of that pasuk. It was never learning a pasuk in total isolation. A third item I'll mention to you. He told me, sorry, the entire parak. I'm going to share with you the makar for this Derech HaLimud because he got me thinking. Mr. Book got me thinking. This is a balabas who's still alive. I think he's about 105 today. I'm not about sure today, but he's still alive. He lives in Gateshead. He told me that in the Lashon they were very makpid that you don't speculate what the Gemara means. One finger was in the Gemara, one finger was in Rashi. Never go weiter until you've consulted Rashi on that Gemara, so that one, so to speak, keeps the Rashi as a GPS system on course without me falling into any other speculation. There are other pieces up which maybe I'll mention if there's time, but he really got me thinking. I started learning with him. I learned from him unfortunately for only 2.5 years, and then I was forced, I don't want to say forced, but my parents asked me, Jonathan, you've been in yeshiva 12 years now, we would like you to at least get smicha. So I went to the Rosh Yeshiva and asked to help me get smicha. So they told me, this is a Talmudical college, not a rabbinical college, so we don't give smicha here. So there actually was one other person who was taking smicha, but they made a special exception for him. Someone you actually might know, Y. Rubenstein, Yudayana Rubenstein. He was actually was learning smicha right next to me in Gateshead. You'll see in a few moments why that's relevant. But after I met Mr. Book, something interesting happened to me. I lost my chavrusa in the afternoon. That was the major chavrusa of the day. And the afternoon Seder in Gateshead was from 3 till 7. It's very, very long. Friday nights was amazing because Seder started at 6 p.m. In the winter, Shabbos came in about 3. You finished the meal by about 5:36. So we had a 6-hour Seder from 6 till midnight. It was awesome. So it was interesting. In Gateshead, you had there was very little Yetzer Hara out there. You can always look for one, but it was really... I don't know who's watching this, but the Gentiles in Gateshead, they had the highest rate of drinking in Europe. I think they also probably had the most skin covered in tattoos than any other country. When you walk the streets of Gateshead, it was not unusual to get attacked. That's not unusual. I'm not saying it's like that now, but it happened many times when I was there for the 6-year stint that I was there. Why am I telling you this? Because if you were learning in Gateshead, there really was nothing else to do. And if you loved learning and you enjoyed it, or you had a reason why you wanted to accomplish something, so these long starim were very good. I lost my afternoon's chavrusa, and I said, you know what? Great, I'm not even going to look for another one. And I took out the Gemara Gittin which we were learning, and then I went and took my own Gemara Brachas and put it on top of it, and I started at the beginning, and just learnt on my own. Yuda Yona was sitting next to me because he had no chavrusa in Yeridea, so he was chazing Yeridea, and many times he would ask me because I had no chavrusa for him to take me away from. So sometimes he would give me his Yeridea, and he would spit out Baal Peh, Mechaber Ramah, Shach and Taz, and I would check that he was reading it correctly because he was memorizing the Gantz curriculum for Yeridea. I could not find any chavrusas. No one was learning Yeridea. So I had no choice but to do it on my own. So just for your information, I wish I did Chazara since, but I decided I was just going to learn Mechaber Ramah a few hundred times. I finished Mechaber Ramah a few hundred times. I don't want to say how many, it doesn't really make a difference. And then, after a few hundred times, then I started creating a new Seder, and I just learned Shach and Taz on every single Sif. I would learn every Shach and every Taz 30 times before doing anything else other than just learning it. 30 times, and then I would try to figure out, okay, what's the main point in each Shach and Taz, and I would underline it in yellow. After I finished all the Shachantaz, then I just did one Seder. Mechaber Ramah, Shachantaz. That was it. So there was a little bit of Pri Megadims, a bit of Aruch HaShulchan, whatever, but otherwise, I kept doing that again and again and again. So when I came to my Feher in Gateshead, they had no Rabbanim to give Feher in Yerodeh, so they sent you to the Av Beis Din in London. At that time, it was Rabbi Katriel Kaplan, Diane Kaplan. He was Av Beis Din of Gittin. So it was only 8-hour gruel, and then that was a Tosh Bal Peh part. It was in 2 sections, 4 hours and then 4 hours. And then you had 2 weeks to answer about 40 questions on Arba Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. Not that you were expected to have been baki in them, but you were expected to be able to learn how to answer the different questions with your own research. You got 2 weeks to do that. So I applied the Derech HaLimud of sequential learning and Chazara to Smicha. And it was interesting to me that Dan Kaplan picked up very quickly that I knew Mechaber Ramah very well. Okay, I'll leave it at that for now. Moving forward, what I discovered learning with Mr. Book was that a question started coming up. Why aren't we being told to start from the beginning and just learn sequentially? So this question I addressed many times in the Sefer, and I quote the Sfarim that started coming my way, so to speak. The one that really hit me the most was a Kuntras by Rabbi Shimon First. Rabbi Shimon First, Tzal, is no longer alive. He passed away about 30 years ago. I wrote to him from Gateshead, and I said that your Sefer has completely changed my life. It's called Tnu Kol V'Torah. Most of the Sefer is taken up by Haskamas. He's writing the Sefer and he's screaming very strong words. I've got to be very careful how I put this. Begging that Rosh Yeshivas should please listen to the Gedolim and make sure that the Bachrim don't give away thousands and thousands and thousands of their hours in Pilpul and Iyun before they know how to learn a simple Gemara Rashi. He quotes, half the Sefer is Haskamas from Rav Moshe Feinstein. I'll just read you some of them. Reb Shach, he was very, very well known for screaming constantly to the Bachrim, please cover more ground. Gemara Rashi and Pashat Tosfos. The Steipler, Rav Kanievsky, that's of course Reb Chaim Kanievsky's father. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, Reb Moshe Chevroni. It's got Rabbi Ruderman quotes from the Beis Yisrael and Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum. You've got really serious names who are saying B'Peh Maleh, B'Leiv Echad. You've got to cover ground. That's the only way to be able to have a real deep Sipuk HaNefesh from learning Torah. To cover ground and Chazara. And that's what gives a person a kinyan. When I first went to Gateshead, Rabbi Moshe Schwab was the mashgiach. The 6 years he was the mashgiach when I visited Gateshead, and the only one line I remember for him was the following: the definition of a masmid is not how many hours he learns a day, but how many minutes he learns an hour. So a masmid is someone who learns 60 minutes an hour. Wow, that's real hasmada, and that always stuck for me because Mr. Book was always on my case for covering ground. And Chazara. There's a Rabbi Newman here, Rabbi David Newman here in Monsey. He's creating a revolution, literally. And what's the revolution? He's 12th grade Rabbi in Shari Torah. And his revolution is very simple. He teaches the Gemara extremely thoroughly, every single Amud. And he gets the Bachrim to do Chazara on the entire Amud. And then the next Amud. And the Sipuk HaNefesh, the sense of, oh my gosh, I really know this Amud very well. It creates such a desire to learn the next Amud. And what ends up happening is that they finish Masechtas. There are boys who finished Makos 30 times, 40 times. There are boys who finished Saita 10, 15, 20, 30 times. Some of you, I think, might be nodding heads. You're familiar with what he's doing. This is slowly catching on in realizing that one of the problems our Bachrim are experiencing is that when they're learning very slowly, and to be very honest with you, I mean, some of you have been through this, and you know it yourselves. If you're learning so slowly that you're covering an amud a week max, many times, just be honest with me. Please, just be honest. Many times, the first person has finished, let's say, 6 or 8 or 9 blot over a couple of months. If they would be asked, okay, you spent 6-7 hours a day plus for 4, 5, 6 days a week. Covering these, let's say, 9 blot. If one were then asked, could you please repeat how the Mishnah began at the beginning of the first sugya and unfolded into the Gemara, and how it continued, not Shagapataya al Bal Peh, just the basic outline. How many people, after doing this for several months, and it's only 9 pages, how many people could put their hand up and say, oh yeah, sure, and very easily go from the beginning of the Mishnah to wherever they're up to? I think the percentage would not be very high. I don't mean that Has V'Shalom is a kidrug. I'm just bringing out something very simple. Something happened where learning Pashup Pshat, going weiter, and getting Chazara as, and I'm going to say this very carefully, preparation for Iyun. That the purpose of breadth, the purpose of covering ground, is not for itself. It's preparation for being able to have enough mass of information that one can then do Iyun, which I'm going to simply define as analysis. Ma'ayin from the word eye means pay attention to detail, so that you can now pull from the different pieces of information, having covered a lot of ground, and compare similarities, contrast differences, and come up with the subtle nafkaminas, which is what Tosfos is doing almost all the time. He's borrowing from... There's almost nobody here that would be able to sit in the shir of Tosfos, because Tosfos was assuming that anyone who was in his shir knew the whole of Shas Bavli. And for that matter, Sifra and Sifri and Ga'anim, which were sometimes quoted as well. It's only thanks to the printing press, which ended up putting all of the Gemara on the same pages when it got printed, so that eventually the printers were able to put inside Tosfos, in the parentheses, which page number of what Masechta he's referring to. Otherwise, Tosfos knew that anyone who he was talking to knew exactly where he was referencing. So it comes out, and I'll explain this in a little bit more detail. The Iyun, real Iyun, is really meant to take place after having covered a lot of ground. If that's really true, then why is it that we don't do it that way? So there really is a good reason. It really is. And this is something that Mr. Book enlightened me with, and explained how he had back and forth with the then Rosh Hashiva of Gateshead, which was Reb Leib, there were two, Reb Leib Gurwitz and Reb Leib Lapian. So he told me the following. Mr. Book was in Gateshead Yeshiva in 1929. In 1929, the Rosh Hashiva of Gateshead was Reb Moshe Landensky. He was the son of Reb Nachman Landensky, who was Rosh Hashiva at that time in Radin, appointed by the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim passed away in 1933. The father came to visit his son in 1929 in Gateshead Yeshiva to see how he was doing. Mr. Book was in the shir, and the father of Moshe Landensky was sitting at the back of Nachman Landensky, and at the end of the shir he got up and said to his son, in front of all the Bakrim, why are you learning Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos and Rishonim if they haven't finished at least one Seder of Shas? This was like such an obvious question, and his son's answer was, these Bakrim at very most will be in yeshiva for 3 years, and then they go on to university. That is the mahalach in England, and it pretty much even was in my time. If we don't give them a taste of Iyun while they are in yeshiva for 2 or 3 years, then when they go to university and they'll see that all these different subjects are taught in tremendous depth, they will not have an appreciation of the depth of Torah, and may even depreciate the the depth of Torah. And so therefore it was considered Hoirasha. And this was a blanket Hoirah. It was like a blanket Haskam amongst many Gedolim, that in order to save the next generation, we have to switch to much more Pilpul and Iyun to enable them to realize there's depth to Torah. And he answered his father, the goal here is not that these Bochrim will know Shas Be'iyun. The goal is that their children will come back to Yeshiva, and these Bochrim will be machshiv Torah enough that their sons will stay in Yeshiva. That was the way it was said to me. It was so interesting that within 2 weeks, I forget the name, please forgive me, there was another gentleman, elderly gentleman in Gateshead, who completely lifitumai, I was actually in his store, told me the exact same story, that he was in the same shir in 1929. So in a 2-week period, I heard it from two Eidim, this story. But I'm just bringing out, there was a time when in the Volozhny Yeshiva, the Derech HaLimud was to finish all of Shas, and with a lot of chazara. And that was not a goal in of itself, it was preparation for Iyun. I quote in the Sefer Rabbi Wasserman, Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman of blessed memory. He, as you know, was a Talmud Muvchak of the Chafetz Chaim. And he writes, I quote all the Makoros. Many of the Makoros I put directly in Hebrew, so that anyone wants to check if my English is manipulative or is accurate or not. So I put the Hebrew as well in many cases. He quotes very simply that in Kovetz Shiurim, he says that the Gemara Rashi, which he would learn from the beginning of the Mishnah to the next Mishnah, without Tosfos, and he would do Chazara many, many times, and then learn Tosfos. Those Tosfos he remembers Be'iyun right up into his old age, but the Gemara Rashi Tosfos that he learnt on the Blat, before learning all of just Gemara Rashi on that Mishnah to the end of that Mishnah, to wherever the next Mishnah began, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Blat later, those Tosfos which he learnt on the spot and Be'iyun, he does not have the same tefisa, the same clarity and grasp as he does of the ones that he did not learn until he first learned Gemara Rashi. And so he talks and when he talks about Derech HaLimud, first learn Gemara Rashi as many times as possible, and then hit Tosfos. I'm going to quote to you how the Mishnah was written. Very, very interesting. It's Gemara in Gittin, Samach Zayin, Amud Aleph, talks about Issa ben Yehuda, tells us the shvach of different Gedolim of the time. Rabbi Akiva, who, as you know, started learning at 40, but Chazal call him an Oitzer Belum, a storehouse that was bursting. Rashi, explaining that Lashon, what does it mean that Rabbi Akiva was a storehouse bursting with knowledge? He quotes the Avos Reb Nosson Perek Yud Ches Ois Aleph. Rashi quotes that Rabbi Akiva, he was like a farmer who would go into the field and he would collect barley, wheat, spelt, rye, oats, etc., put it into a basket, and then when he came home, at home he had separate compartments for each of these different grains. So says Avos Reb Nosson, Rabbi Akiva, when he came back to yeshiva, he'd learned when he was much younger, but he didn't get to Mishnayos, he'd only learned Mikra. He started learning from all his Rebbeim, this one Mishnah, this one Agata, this one Halacha, this one Mikra, but at night he would organize his learning into sections, and that's how he taught himself and then taught his Talmidim. One of his main Talmidim was Rabbi Meir, who learnt and taught the way his Rabbi Akiva did, which was organized learning, sequential from beginning to end. And then, who was the Rebbe, the main Rebbe of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who wrote the Mishnayos? So in the Igeret of Rabbi Shira Gaon, who explains the Masorah of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, claims that Rabbi Akiva, who was the Rebbe of Rabbi Meir, was the Rebbe of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's Lashon in Mishnayos was directly from Rabbi Meir, from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva saved the Torah Sheba'al Peh. He organized the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So I talk a lot about the concept of organizing the information, because that is really what Mishnayos is. It's organized information. Yesh Seder LeMishnah. It's incredible. absolutely mind-blowing when you consider that the Mishnayos is all of Tariag mitzvahs distilled into 6 sections, Shisha Sadarim, and then the 6 sections have been subdivided into 63 Masechtas, 63 tractates, and then every single tractate, loyal to the title, Gittin, Kiddushin, Brachas, etc., is then broken down into named and numbered chapters, and each chapter is broken down into a numbered paragraph called a Mishnah. It's incredible organization. And many of you who are familiar with Kahati will see that Kahati will often give you a couple of lines, sometimes a paragraph, to show you the Hemshech, how the previous Mishnah is unfolding into this Mishnah, and this Mishnah is based upon, and why it's a continuation from the previous Mishnah. So you get this Hemshech, you understand Yesh Seder Mishnah in this concept of that there's constant organization and constant seichel behind how one thing feeds into another. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, I heard this from one of his Talmidim, a Talmud Muvchak of his, Rabbi Meir Pogro. Go to mastertorah.com. mastertorah.com. Rabbi Meir Pogro, he's in his early 40s. He was a Talmud Muvchak of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky as a child. Meir Pogro followed the Derech HaLimud that was taught to him by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky when Rabbi Yaakov started Beis Mikra. Beis Mikra in Monsey was started by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, and originally it was to follow Chazal. I say 2 words: trust Chazal. That's all you have to do. Trust Chazal. End of statement. What do Chazal say? Ben 5 shanim lemikra, ben 10 lemishnah, ben 15 letalmud. 5 years of Tanakh. And if you look at the small print, look in Shulchan Aruch, it paskins this, it's Gemara and Kedushin, Daf Mem and Daf Lamed, you'll see it there. In Shulchan Aruch, Reish Mem Hey in Yerodeh, tells us that Derech HaLimud was to divide one's learning into 3 parts. We don't do that in the yeshiva system. I'll share with you in a minute what's the makar for that, because there's a machlekes with Tosfos in Sanhedrin, Lamed Dalet, and last Tosfos in Kedushin, which talks about Derech HaLimud. Should we learn sequentially and split our learning between Tanakh, Mishnah, and Gemara? Or should we just learn Gemara? That's the basic machlokes. Rambam and Shulchan Aruch paskin, like the Gemara, that you should learn sequentially, organized from beginning to end. It happens to be, that's how it's paskined in Shulchan Aruch. You'll see the Shach asks the question, we don't learn like that. We learn, and he uses our minhag, is to learn Shas Bavli. We don't learn all of Mikra and Mishnah. Why? Because, and he's quoting Sanhedrin, Lamed Dalet, Tosfos there, says, because Bavli, is Bolol Kulam. It's all inclusive. It's one big cholent of Mikra, Mishnah, Tosefta, Sifra. It's psukim all over the place. Listen carefully. This is what Mr. Book pointed out to me. Because he was showing me, here's the point of, if you want to call it, deviation between the 2 Derech HaLimuds. One the Sfardim pretty much kept until fairly recently, of learning Mikra with Trop as at 5 years old all the way till 10. Then you learn Mishnah sequentially, and then you hit Gemara. But Gemara is a peirush to the Mishnah, and Mishnah is a peirush to Taryag mitzvahs contained in Mikra. So it's all very sequential. So comes along the Shach and says, no, you don't have to do that, just learn Gemara, because it contains everything. So Mr. Book, it took me minutes and minutes and minutes to figure out the answer to his question. He kept saying, so what's the Shach saying? So I say, yeah, so you you just have to learn Gemara. And that's why the yeshivas follow this way. He says, what's the Shach saying? So it says, Shach is saying, if you learn Gemara, you get it all. He says, okay, so then what Gemara do you have to learn? Which Masechta? Oh, and then I helped. What's the Shach saying? Either you follow Shulchan Aruch and Rambam and the Gemara, which is learn sequentially, or follow Tosfos, which is the Derech HaLimud, essentially of what we have left today. But what is that? What is that? That's the makar for learning Shas and not learning so much Mikra and Mishnah. What does that mean? The only way I can be Mekayim, what Tosfos is telling me, is if I learn 1 Masechta, 2 Masechtas, first and sixth parak. Oh, so a person has to learn the whole of Shas to get what the Shach is saying. So that's why in the time of the Lashon they were still following that. So I don't want this Has V'Shalom to be a kitrug. I'm saying this is my personal story. I wrote a book about it because I had pneumonia some 1994. That's how long ago? I think that's 21 years ago. Okay, so I had pneumonia for 3 weeks, and after 3 days on antibiotics, it had an interesting effect on me. I just couldn't sleep. I was not able to sleep, but it was keeping me awake like I was drinking 10 Turkish coffees a day. I was doing nothing, and just the antibiotics, but I couldn't fall asleep, and I was completely awake. So I said, you know what, this is great. I'll write the sefer that I've always wanted to write, and I started writing it. So I finished the first 179 pages, and then I got better, and I never finished the book. 3 years later, I got pneumonia a second time, and I said, oh great, now I can finish it off. So it took me 3 years, 4 weeks over a 3-year period to write. It was just like pouring out. This was years and years of frustration and years of back and forth, trying to make sense out of what am I doing in a system that is not actually going to get me through Mikra, Mishnah, Gemara, etc. in a sequential way. Has V'Shalom, I don't mean this as bashing. I'm just explaining that if a person has no goal to finish certain areas of the Torah, that is a goal not to finish. That is a plan not to know. If a person doesn't have Chazara, which is really the Ikar Limud, the Ikar Limud is Chazara. I give many Makoros for why Chazara is the Ikar Limud. I'll tell you an astonishing story. It's brought in Toldos Agra. It's not a popular sefer because you're going to read things there that it's not what we're doing today. The Vilna Gaon in Toldos Agra, it's brought what was his criteria for the type of person he learned the Chavrusa. Does anyone know? The Vilna Gaon. We can't really be masig the mind of the Gra. I'm not sure what exact age it was, because I once read it was 40 years old, and then later on I read that he was much younger. But they reached a point in his life where his mind worked so fast that he didn't learn any Sfarim. All he did was laying inside a Sefer Torah, but while he was laying, every pasuk, his mind would go through Kol HaTorah Kula on that pasuk. The entire Torah Sheba'al Peh, whether it was Medrash, Tosefta, Sifra, Sifrim, Bavli, Yushalmi, everything that was on that. And that's how he did his Chazara. And that was the original way we learned in the Midbar after Moshe Rabbeinu taught us every parasha, not weekly parasha, the parashas, the weekly parashas broken down to Ptuchos and Stumos. He would teach, and this you'll find this in Eruv in Daf Nun Daled, where it asks Kesed Seder HaMishnah. So it talks there on Nun Gimel Nun Daled, talks about Chazara a ton. It talks about Chazara in ways that's right. I don't want to say frightening, but it makes the point extremely clear that Chazara is the only real way to have a kinyan in learning. It's not talking about Chazara of Iyun and Pilpul. That comes later on. So the Vilna Gaon, this brilliant mind, what was his criteria for choosing a Chavrusa? Mind-blowing. You know what it wasn't how smart the person was. He had one condition to learn with someone, that person would learn with him the same thing, whether it was a sugya or a mishnah or a pasuk, 101 times, and not tire, not be fed up, not be bored. That was his criteria. Do you love learning enough that you would say it again and again 101 times? What's special about 101? So, as you know, it's a Gemara in Chagiga Daf Test that tells us, you cannot compare someone who learned something 100 times to the person who learned 101. 101 is superior, but it's only one. So there's different explanations. One of my favorite explanations is really the Shla Kadosh in Masechta Shavuos. He brings that the Malach, who's Minor, appointed on Zikaron, his name is Michael. The Malach, which is Minor, on Shikha, his name is the Samach Mem. Samach Mem, it's not difficult, is Gematria 100. Samach Mem, 60-40 is 100. The Gematria of Michael is 101. So when a person finishes 100 times, now goes on to 101, he leaves, so to speak, the domain of shikha and hits zikaron. But the Vilna Gaon's point was very simple. Avas HaTorah means that a person would not tire. He gives the mashal, brought there and told Zagra, that would you get tired of kissing your child? Of course not. You love your child. You kiss him on the forehead. Why? Because you love that child. So you don't get. You want to show how much you love that child again and again. Oh, I'm not talking about 101 times. Every time you see your kid, a hug and a kiss. Comes along the Vilna Gaon and Evan Shleima. Evan Shleima is his Musa Sefer. Perek Ches on Limud HaTorah, Ois Beis. Mitchila, this is the Lashon of the Gra. Mitchila tzarech lemale krisoy. A person at the beginning should fill his stomach. Mikra, Mishnah. Then he adds, even if he can't explain the Mishnah, Yilamed Kula, he should learn the entire Mishnah. Gemara, Bavli, Yerushalmi, Tosefta, Mechilta, Sifra, Sifri, the Kol HaBraisas, V'achakach, Lasoik Bepilpul, Chaverim. Then go into comparing, contrasting, V'zehu Derech HaTorah. This is the derech of the Torah. Aval hameshane seder halimud. Anyone who changes the sequence of learning. Shalomet chila, that first learns later eich lepalpel, how to learn be'iyun, to go back and forth and analyze. The eino yodea mishnah achas kitsurasa, and he doesn't yet know one mishnah properly in its full form. He will forget the Torah he even learnt when he was much younger. It's a very powerful statement. Now let me share with you a story that's brought about Reb Chaim of Lozhen, Av HaPilpul. Reb Chaim of Lozhen, and this is brought in Tnu Kavod HaTorah. Reb Shimon first was screaming and begging. He brings all sorts of rayas, very, very scary. He brings from the Maharal, brings from the Ramchal. The way we learn today, he says it's Roy, and Reb Shimon first not saying this, he's quoting the Maharal, that because we've turned away from learning sequentially, and we're learning much more Be'iyun, and we don't teach children Mishnayos before Bavli, he says it's Roy Likrai. It's worthy that we should tear our garments in the same way that we see a Sefer Torah burning, Rahman al-Islam. There's a very, very strong lashon. I don't want to go into any more on that, but he quotes in here this from Reb Chaim of Lozhen. Reb Chaim Brisk. Reb Chaim Brisk married off his son Velvel to the Broider Rav's daughter. At the chuppah, he told the Broider Rav that my son Velvel, who was 16 at the time under the chuppah, knows Gantz, Shas, Rashi, Klor. So the Broider Rav turned to the Reb Chaim Brisk, you're the Ava Pilpul, what type of a shvach is that? He knows Shas, Rashi? He would tell me 100 Pilpulim. He said, no. He said, by me, I can't say in Yiddish, but so you can see it inside it properly. By me, someone who says a Pilpul and doesn't know Shas, Rashi as the bare minimum, guaranteed it's a Pilpul Shel Hevel. It's pure speculation. It's not necessarily what the Torah is saying. And the reason why Mr. Book explained to me is if a person hasn't got all the sugyas and now does a Pilpul, how does he know the Pilpul isn't slogged up by a sugya somewhere else in Shas? Which means I'm purely speculating because I just don't know what else is out there that actually would completely undermine either the foundation of what I'm actually saying in this particular Eon, or it really has no place for it. I'm not saying no Eon has v'shalom. I'm not saying that. I bring out in a Sefer again and again, there's actually no machlokas between Bekias and Eon. There really isn't. It's just a question of Bekias is really the preparation for Eon. Breadth is what you build depth on. You can't build depth without breadth. You can't build depth without the foundation. Yeah.
That story on the book is printed?
Yes, it's printed in Tnu Kavod HaTorah. Yeah. I'll be happy to take a couple of questions. I'm just going to close on a very good sefer to look at, and all of us are familiar with it. All of us. I think every single person in this room has heard of Orchat Tzadikim. Here's my question. Don't put your hand up. I'm not here to embarrass any of us. How many of us managed to get to the end of the sefer? I don't know why it's hashgacha pratis. Shar HaTorah is the last but one perek, last but one chapter. It's a pity. Why? Because if you look through there, it's mind-blowing. This is a Rishon who's written about 700 years ago about Derech HaLimud. And he's decrying how we are falling away from the Derech HaLimud of covering ground with a lot of chazara, and we're getting enticed to do a lot of pilpul. This is already 700 years, so it's not a new problem, it's an old problem. The Maharal, I cannot say this on my own. I would never be able to say this Has v'Shalom on my own. The Maharal says it's very pashut why pilpul is so much more popular. Because the concept of chidush, of me standing out, that I'm different, and therefore he calls it gaiva, is so inviting. Because just to cover ground again and again and again, that doesn't make me different from you. But if I can outslug you with a pilpul, and my mind is smarter than yours, then that makes me feel special. But he says that the makor for that is gaiva, and it has no kiyum. Those are not my words, it's the Maharal. You'll find it in Derech Chaim on Perkei Avos. I think it's the end of Perek Vav. But I have all the quotes inside the 1 Minute Masmid. I'll close. The purpose of this is not Hashem to create any kitruk Has v'Shalom. It's just a question. This is my personal story, and it's, I committed it to writing for people to be able to look at the question themselves and look at the makaras, and then make their own decisions, their own conclusions. What I found very helpful for myself, and again, this is my story; it doesn't have to be yours. Chumash is, I started creating a way for me to make much more sense out of Chumash. Chumash is really two items. Chumash is a storyline. I'm making this super simple, not because we're simple, because it really is simple. Chumash is there's billions, trillions, unlimited layers of Chumash, because Chumash is the Oraisa, the Das Hashem, literally. But in the simplest, most skeletal definition, Chumash is a storyline, Brias Olam, till the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, and then Yeshua entering Eretz Yisrael is already the end of the Torah, 2,488 years. This storyline, you've got Brias Ha'olam, 10 generations from Adam till Noach, the Mabul, 10 generations from Noach till Avram, the life of Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov, Sarah, Rachel, Leah, Yosef, goes down to Mitzrayim, sold into slavery, Shibud Mitzrayim, then you've got the 10 Makos 10, and then you've got Yetziat Mitzrayim, Matan Torah, 40 years in the Midbar, end of Chumash, storyline. Plotted throughout the storyline are Tariag Mitzvahs. These are the two components. Storyline, Tariag Mitzvahs. The storyline is the starting point, the platform for all your future learning that's non-legal. Anything that's not halachic, Agadata, Medrash, Hashkafa, Musa, Hasidus, will find its makor most of the time, not always, but vast majority of times, has to find its makor somewhere in the oraisa of the storyline. Anything you're going to learn in the future, outside of the Chumash, which is legal, halachic. Mishnayos is the first attempt to put the Torah Sheba'al Peh in writing. The vast majority of Mishnayos is opinions of halacha. The explanations you're going to get later with the Gemara, but it's the initial stage of taking Tariag Mitzvahs, which is what Mishnayos is. Mishnayos is a Perush to Tariag Mitzvahs. Not my Lashon. First Rav Bartanur, Pirkei Avos, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. He says the biggest difference between Pirkei Avos and all the Al Masechtas, all the Al Masechtas are Perush to Tariag Mitzvahs. This one is the only one that doesn't have a specific area of mitzvahs that it's pertaining to. It's all over the place. Ben Adam Lechamakam, Ben Adam Lechaver, Ben Adam La'atzmai. Mishnayos is a perush to Tariag Mitzvahs. The Gemara is a perush to the Mishnayos, which is a perush to Tariag Mitzvahs. The legal codes, the Smag, Tur, Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam, they are all legal conclusions of the discussion in the Gemara, which is a perush to Tariag Mitzvahs. So what ends up happening is if you know Tariag Mitzvahs, you've got in your brain 613 files that when you learn, your new information has a place to go. I compare it to a busy office with papers, documents all over the place. There are two different offices. One is very busy, and the other one they both look like a mess. But the big difference is that the one that is busy has a cubbyhole, a file in the filing cabinet, has a drawer, has a shelf for every type of file, of letter or document. So in a matter of minutes, you can put everything away and you can easily find information. A messy office, which has piles of papers all over the place, with no filing system and no shelves, no cubbyholes, no drawers, a person can spend ages and very frustrated, and sometimes say to himself, I'm not even going to bother looking because I can't find it anyway. The brain is not a whole lot different. When we organize the brain, the way I was describing with Rabbi Akiva, in fact, the Chumash is even organized, but we're not going there now. Mishnah is extremely organized. Even Gemara is actually very organized. I'm not talking about that now. I mentioned a little bit in the Sefer. And then, when all the codes were written, they're all extremely organized. The Rif wrote the Talmud Katan. If he wrote a Talmud Katan today, he would be put in Cherem. He took out most of the Agadata and most of the back and forth and put the main machlekes and the conclusions. Often included Yerushalmi and the Gaonim. Anyone who would dare do anything to Shas Bavli today, but the Rif was the Rif. But he called it Talmud Katan, and he said he wrote it because the generation were having a hard time getting lost in all the back and forth of the Gemara, so he made a shortened version of it. Rambam, he did the most radical, and he actually he had his Sfarim initially burnt because of his revolution. He took all Tariq mitzvahs and made them into 14 major categories, the Yad Chazaka, then sub-categorized those into 83 sub-categories, and then he plotted all the Tariq mitzvahs based on each of those categories. Then, that as an index, he then gave you all the numbered halachas of detail of Tariq mitzvahs. So it's all a peirush of Tariq mitzvahs. So, why am I telling you this? Because if a person learns Tariq mitzvahs, and I have a separate sefer that I give you a listing of Tariq mitzvahs, but I give you about 40 different makoros through Chazal, but also especially Rishonim and Achronim, who talked about the importance of knowing Tariq mitzvahs. Tariq mitzvahs is an amazing way to give you files in your brain, so that when you learn new information, your brain has somewhere for it to go. Because your brain's already organized and ready. It's like an office that's ready to take any document you need. There's much more to be said on the subject. I thank you for your patience. And I ask you to please understand that my purpose tonight was not to bring out Kitchuk Has V'Shalom. It's just to help us understand that when we realize what's happening to a bacher in yeshiva, who's, if let's just pretend he knows how to read accurately and fluently. Just take that as a bottom baseline. He starts learning Breishis. By second grade, maybe finish Breishis and a little bit of Shmais. By third grade, they start learning Mishnayos. Brachas, maybe a bit of Sukkah, Yuma. Fourth grade, they start even learning Gemara. Bava Metzia, I think the second not the first Mishnah, Elam Metzia, we'll start the second Mishnah because the first one's a bit too conceptual and abstract. And you ask a 4th, 5th, 6th grader, what are you doing here? He's clueless. What am I doing here? Well, I don't understand. I haven't done any Chazara really on Breishis. I've almost forgotten all that. Or Shmais. Vayikra Babei Madvarma, how do they ever get to? A little bit of Nach, maybe Yusuf Shabdim. I'm not saying this to be facetious or Kitchukas V'Shalom. I'm stating an observation. It's no mystery why a kid, Has V'Shalom, might give up on learning when they realize, I don't have a kinyan. I haven't mastered anything, and so it doesn't make me feel very good about myself. The Ikka mastery, the Ikka kinyan, is to learn something thoroughly and then do lots of chazara, because the chazara is what creates the kinyan. So please understand what we've been through, what our kids are going through, and realize that the most powerful way to have a sipuk hanefesh, even if it's just a small amount of learning, start learning small and do a lot of chazar on it. I close and I truly mean it. I call this the 1 Minute Masmid because all the characters in the book I quote are real people who, some of them started on a one minute Sidorim. My favorite character, unfortunately, is no longer alive. He was killed by a terrorist about 25 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was. 18 years ago. Scott Goldberg, also known as Yecheskel Goldberg. So I actually quote him in here. We learned together in university when I was taking my master's in education. We were in that course for 2.5 years. And I introduced him to Derech Limud of the 1 Minute Masmid, and he started adopting it. It was very, very simple. He hated learning. He hated learning, but he hated himself for not learning enough. And then one Shabbos, a friend of his from yeshiva that he had learnt in Torah in Eretz Yisrael came for Shabbos, and he was so broken because his friend had stayed in learning and knew so much, and Scott was in computer sales and hated learning. Not because he hated learning, it's because he realized he'll never amount to anything, and so he was miyayish on himself. So when he was pouring his heart out to me, and I told him about just learn 1 minute of Chumash a day, not more. And I gave him 5 Chumashim Sidorim. So he had 5 1-minute Sidorim. And then I said, every week you're going to add on 1 minute. So in 2 weeks he was now learning for 10 minutes a day. In 3 weeks it was 30 minutes a day. And he kept adding on till it was an even kill of 2 hours a day of Chumash Sidorim. It's all explained in here, where we defeat the Yetzer Hara by going small. Start small and build. That's how to build the muscles of Hasmada. Don't do 60 minutes an hour. Start with 1, 2, 3, and keep building on. And then a person can't wait to cover more, as he senses, I've got a kinyan, I've done Chazar, I know it. I can't fool myself because I do know I know this pasuk, I do know I know this Mishnah, or this Masechta of Mishnahs, or whatever it is that he's doing. And the schus of learning Hashem's beautiful, perfect Torah, maybe we'll be zeicha to see the coming of Mashiach.